and I had to take my shirt off there from the last meeting. But with me today is Frank Bigelow, who is a staff chief from CAL FIRE, and he is going to present to us a number of the legislative changes that have occurred in California related to wildfire prevention, related to preparedness. So I will turn it right over to you, Chief Bigelow, to maybe introduce yourself. And I know you have a presentation for us, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions and answers as we go along throughout the presentation. If you have questions for Chief Bigelow, put them in the chat feature or even in the Q&A, and I will help moderate that as we go along. So Chief Bigelow, I will turn it to you.
Great, thanks for that introduction, Daniel. I appreciate it. As Daniel mentioned, my name is Frank Bigelow. I work for the Office of the State Fire Marshal. I'm a staff chief, and my charge in our division is to oversee a few statewide programs, and I'll list some of those off for you. It's our Defensible Space program, our Home Hardening program, our Utility Fire Mitigation program, our online or soon to be implemented statewide online burn permit program, land use planning, which includes our subdivision review program, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a little while, and then also our fire plan program. So just a few things there to oversee. I've been with CAL FIRE for just under 19 years. I came up through the ranks, if you will. I started out as a firefighter 1 in our seasonal positions and kind of worked my way up through the operational ranks, and then joined more of the administrative ranks with the last few years. But I've been implementing at the unit level the Defensible Space programs, our grants program, our damage inspection, and others at the unit level, and now I've come to the Sacramento level to help kind of broaden my scope and bring some of that expertise, if you will, from the field and relate it to how we implement things in Sacramento. So I was asked today to come speak specifically about some legislation that has that's current legislation, those things that have been written into law and have taken effect. And that, and I want to show you and talk to you a little bit about what we've done to implement those pieces of legislation. And then I'm going to transition into talking about some new legislation, some things that were just signed by the governor this last year that haven't been. Some of the things have taken place, and then others that are planned to take place after July 1 and beyond, and what our plan is for implementation related to those. And then finally, I'll end with just some updated statistics for year-end statistics from CAL FIRE, just to give you kind of a sense for some of the accomplishments that the department had and some of the trials we had related to the number of incidents and others as we go on. So I'm going to share my screen here.
And Frank, while you're doing that, we've had a few more people add. For those of you just joining us, as Chief Bigelow gives his presentation, if you come up with questions or comments, please just use the chat feature or the Q&A feature, and we'll be working to moderate that as we go along. So again, down below, chat or Q&A. Chief Bigelow, back to you.
Okay, just confirm you can see the slide. Let me move this off.
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay, and can you see this? Your sharing screen thing here in the middle? Hopefully not.
No, we do not. We just see the front
okay.
page.
Okay. So one of the changes that I'll kind of jump into related to Assembly Bill 9 that was just signed into law within the Office of the State Fire Marshal. You see, that hasn't changed, but the division directly under that has changed. We were formerly Wildfire Prevention Engineering, or Wildfire Planning and Engineering, excuse me. And we have now been, by AB 9, asked to create a new division within the Office of the State Fire Marshal. And our new name and all the things that fall under it are called Community Wildfire Preparedness and Mitigation. So as we go through all of this legislation, really the focus for us and the focus of the legislature's intent to help drive us is really community preparedness and mitigation. So, and specifically related to wildfire. So you'll see a lot of those common themes as we focus on some of the legislation when we move forward. So first we'll talk about Assembly Bill 38 that was, and again, I'm talking about current legislation that we are working through that's already been implemented. So AB 38 and specifically related to defensible space home disclosures. So a lot of text here. I'm not going to read it word for word, although this is the text from the bill. In essence, what it did was require that a seller of real property in the very high or high in the LRA or SRA provide documentation that they've received a defensible space inspection and that they were compliant. That's preceding the transaction date. If in the event that that seller can't provide that certificate of document or compliance, they can transfer that responsibility over to the buyer, and then the buyer has 1 year to come into compliance. So really, the thing that I wanted to show here was how we have what we have done, and hopefully my link will take us where it needs to what we've done to implement this. So when it's related to defensible space, if you come over here to our website, and this site I will provide the link in the presentation is fire.ca.gov/dspace. We have a defensible space inspection request portal. So anybody who needs a defensible space inspection related to a home sales transaction can come and request that home sale inspection here. What we also did is incorporate, it's not so specific to Auburn, but we added all these other counties as we are in partnership with these other counties so that they can be directed to the most appropriate person. So as a result of AB 38, we've implemented that portal for people to be able to get their inspection in a timely manner. Some other, ancillary things that came along with that as well is that, and I think it's a good thing as we get a lot of people who move from a more urban, concentrated environment into the wildland. There's a statement on that transaction that says this home is located in a very high fire hazard severity zone. Basically, in a nutshell, be careful. They want this disclosure so that people don't think that they're moving into a concrete jungle and that nothing's going to burn. That they want them to know you're moving into a fire-prone area. So to visit readyforwildfire.com, as it says right in the verbiage in that transaction. But another component of this is on or after July 1st of 2025, this notice that the transaction will provide to the buyer will also disclose the home retrofit, the low-cost retrofits that the buyer has done or the seller has done to improve that home's resistance against wildfire. So just a couple things there related to the AB 38 defensible space inspection portion. So there were two components related to AB 38, two major components that affected our division. The other was the creation of a home hardening program. So the charge here was that we would enter into a joint powers authority, and this is an agreement with CAL FIRE and OES to administer a comprehensive wildfire mitigation program to encourage cost-effective structure hardening and retrofitting, as well as provide defensible space. So what this really boils down to is a direct financial assistance program to the most vulnerable parts of our population to retrofit their home, meaning putting on a new roof, putting on new siding on the most vulnerable part of their home, putting in new multi-pane tempered glass windows, doing the things around that home, sealing up cracks, putting up new defenses around the home to make sure that it stands the best chance of surviving a wildfire, all of which would be bringing that home up to Chapter 70 of the building code. And this is direct financial assistance, as I mentioned, and this could be up to $40,000 per home to help with this. So we've taken a lot of steps in this program. We started in the beginning of 2021, really hitting the ground hard with OES, Office of Emergency Services, and CAL FIRE We've hired the staff we needed to. We've identified 3 pilot communities across the state, 2 of which have already applied for FEMA match dollars, which we're leveraging state dollars to get additional funding. So they've applied, both of the 2 that are ahead have applied for almost $25 million each to help get this program off the ground. And what it's really designed, what our charge is, to build out the program, to build out the means by which a community organization, a fire safe council, a resource conservation district, or the like, or a county could implement this program in their area with little assistance needed or guidance and direction provided by OES and CAL FIRE. So we're really building out the framework and the structure for this program more than we are actually going to be implementing it across the state. So this is a really exciting program, and that we are, as I mentioned, have the 3 pilot communities. We plan to be swinging hammers, as we say, by summer of this year in the 2 first pilot communities. The 3rd will be a little bit later, probably close to end of summer or fall. At that point, we'll be really evaluating the capacity by which we'll be able to expand the program. But look for this to continue to expand and evolve as time goes on. And I look forward, I'm sure there will be questions related to this, and I look forward to answering those toward the end. I put in a couple links here. I plan to share this presentation. I'll give it to Daniel, and he can disseminate it out through the group. So these links will be active. One is here, ready for wildfire, and I'll just click on this one because it's a CAL FIRE. Oh, well, maybe not. Let me cancel that before it takes away our presentation here. Okay, so just know, ready for wildfire, we have a home hardening section where you can get a whole bunch of information related to home hardening on readyforwildfire.org. The next is AB 3074. Yep, go ahead.
Real quick question here, though, in the chat about the definition of most vulnerable. Can you expand on that just a little bit and differentiate what that means? Is it financial vulnerabilities? Is it based on fire hazard? What's the definition of vulnerable?
Excellent question, and I should have been more specific, so thank you for allowing me to clarify. So we were in the bill of AB 38. There were some definitions that we were of those vulnerable communities. So socioeconomic, it's over 65. It's in very high fire hazard severity, very high or very high fire hazard severity zones. In higher fire prone areas. So there were some predefined metrics that we needed to use to refine where we would target the communities first. So it's not, and when I say the most vulnerable, it's those people who don't have the financial means by which to accomplish these retrofits. They are physically unable to do the retrofits due to their age or any disability. And then in these, like I said, the higher fire prone areas and the high and very high fire hazard severity zones. And so those are some of the metrics that we used to determine those areas. So I hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you. Cindy, if you have more, just let us know in the chat.
Excuse me. I did put a link here too to Cal OES's page that talks a little bit more about the program as well. So moving on to AB 3074, this created a new zone in defensible space. So this is a big change and something worth talking about for a lot longer than we have today, but I'm going to hit on some of the highlights. So as you saw, it creates this new zone, as we know it now. Defensible space and Public Resource Code 4291 and Government Code 51182 define defensible space with 2 zones, 0 to 30 feet, and then from that 30 feet, the rest of the 100 feet. What we're charged with doing now is creating a new zone, which will be zone 0, and it's that immediate 5 feet around the house that has been shown time and time again through science and through looking at multiple tragic instances where homes have burned down. that zone around that 5 feet around the hose is the most crucial in having no combustible material or very limited combustible material around it. So what we're doing now, CAL FIRE and members of like the Fire Prevention Officers Association and others across the state have come together in a working group and with the Board of Forestry to determine what that language is going to be and what's going to be allowed or not allowed in that zone. So that hasn't been determined yet, but we're working very diligently twice a week to refine that language, and then we'll be presenting that to the board in the coming months, and then it will go out to public comment. The intent here is to really ramp this up quickly, because for all new construction, this goes into effect January 1st, 2023, as you can see here. Retroactively to construction before January 1, 2023, it will go into effect January 1, 2024. So we really want to get this information out, especially those homes that are going to be built in the short term, that this 0 to 5 foot zone needs to be there. It does give us a little bit of time for those existing homes to be able to really message this. So we plan to really hit this educational component hard with our defensible space inspectors, letting people know what the new regulation is and what can and cannot be in that first 5 feet. So I put some other information in here related to the bill, also that 3074 brought to us. Another one that we're working actively on is SB 190, and this asked us to create what's called a Model Defensible Space Program. So this Model Defensible Space Program is going to be provided for use by local entities to help them develop and establish a program within their jurisdiction that can either, if they have enforcement capabilities within their local ordinance, or if they are wanting to, Fire Safe Council or Resource Conservation District or other, want to conduct assessments, which one of the bills that we're going to talk about a little later asked us to identify, or they identified in the bill, qualifying entities that will be able to assist CAL FIRE in conducting defensible space assessments. And based on our training that we provide through this Model Defensible Space Program, those inspections will be able to be counted as, assuming they're in compliance. If they're not in compliance, then that entity would notify CAL FIRE through the process or the program that we are going to develop that that person or that home was not in compliance, and then CAL FIRE can come out and conduct an inspection to start our formal inspection process. So a lot of things happening in this space and not to be redundant, in the defensible space arena related to the upgrades of the zones and to really broadening our capacity by leveraging the Fire Safe Councils and others to help us get out into the community and conduct those assessments. For CAL FIRE, we don't necessarily need to have permission, air quotes, to go conduct an inspection and start that inspection process. But for other qualified entities, they're going to require to be invited to come onto somebody's property to conduct the assessment. So we'll be working with all across the board, the State Fire Safe Council and others, to really develop out that model and what that's going to look like and how we all approach that system. So more to come on that, but know that the Model Defensible Space Program, the curriculum, has been developed. We are teaching it to our internal staff first, and then we'll be putting that out in the public sphere for groups such as yourselves to intake, and then we'll be creating this broadening out the program and how we're going to develop what the infrastructure of the reporting process will look like. So more to come on that, but a lot of work has been done already. The next one is AB 2911. Excuse me. This one created a new program within our division, called our Subdivision Review. So a couple things it did, though, was required us to create a low-cost retrofit list, which we did. And that's posted. If you go to the fire.ca.gov/dspace. You can access it there. Or if you go on Ready for Wildfire and you go into Prepare and go to Home Hardening, you'll find the low-cost retrofit list there as well. The big thing, though, was it created this subdivision review program, this third bullet here. So the Department of Forestry and the State Fire Marshal's Office will identify subdivisions with more than 30 dwelling units and without a secondary egress route in the SRA and the LRA very high, and develop recommendations to improve the subdivision's fire safety and follow up on implementations of those recommendations. So we've hired the staff to do this. Right now we have 4 dedicated staff who are out conducting these. We've identified a couple hundred of these communities across the state that are going to need this review, but the staff is working diligently. They've conducted quite a few of these inspections and provided these reports back to those AHJs. And this is something that's really important to us and myself as coming from a local area in eastern Madera County, where I could name 5 communities within a few miles of where I live that have this single means of ingress and egress. And it's a 1.5 lane windy road that leads back to a bunch of homes that are in a very vulnerable position. So any kind of help that we can provide to those local jurisdictions or that community in the form of expertise, I think is going to be welcome. And this is a really good program, but more to come on that one as we develop that out more. So now we're going to transition to new legislation, meaning it was just signed by the governor in the fall or early in the fall of this last year. So the first one I kind of touched on a little bit was AB 9. It's the Community Wildfire Preparedness and Mitigation, as I dubbed it. It had a little longer name, but I kind of shortened it down a little bit. But as I mentioned, it established our division. You can see that first bullet point. But it also asked us to establish a State Fire Marshal's Wildfire Mitigation Advisory Committee. And this advisory committee is really going to help us set the framework for for developing out and providing suggestions on implementation of all of the things related to the bills that we've been talking about. So it's just to help us get more eyes on what we're doing and provide a more united front, bringing in leaders from multiple different departments across the state, and how these are all of this stuff is really intertwined with one another, but how we can oftentimes get siloed into our own implementation of these programs, not really thinking about the downstream effects of how it might affect others. So this advisory committee is really going to be brought together to help us identify where those shortfalls or maybe that short-sighted thinking might be, and project a more long-term solution to some of the things that the state is being affected by related to wildfire. The other thing it did was replace the director with the state fire marshal in multiple fire prevention codes. And it's just because the fire marshal's office is charged with implementing those codes. So it just made sense that the state fire marshal be the one that is making any changes or updates to those specifically. We also established the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program at the Department of Conservation. So a lot of things happened with that bill, but the biggest one for us really directly affecting us is the new name and the establishment of some positions, managerial positions, so that we can better organize and dole out responsibilities. Before, we had an assistant deputy director and a staff chief to implement all of our programs. So what this is doing, it's adding a deputy director, 2 assistant deputy directors, and 3 staff chiefs. So really getting that span of control to where it should be, so that the programs that we're implementing really have the oversight and the leader's intent that they deserve. So that it's a really good, positive change for us. The next one is AB 642. This one's related to fire hazard severity zones, and you're going to see a common theme between 2 of them here as we go through. Oftentimes, the legislature They get together and they co-author bills, and they a lot of them get thrown out at us. I just, for me, the programs I oversaw last year, I reviewed 21 bills, and I know that others in our group that are higher level of me reviewed 70 to 80 that directly affected us. So they all throw the same thing into a lot of them to see which one sticks. In this case, the fire hazard severity zone portion stuck in 2 of them, and we'll talk about what those changes are. The biggest one is that now the AB 642 requires us to the moderate and the high fire hazard severity zones in the LRA be mapped. So this is a big one. Currently, only the very high fire hazard severity zones in the local response area is mapped. We will be broadening that when the new maps come out to include moderate and high. And one immediate implication that this has, among many, is excuse me, is when we talked about that defensible space home disclosure, in the law, as we read, it affects the high and very high in the LRA. Well, there is no high in the LRA right now. So those jurisdictions that have high fire hazard severity zone, they don't have to conduct any defensible space inspections prior to the home being sold. Well, as soon as the maps come out and it does establish the high, that will kick in. So now they're going to have to broaden the scope of their defensible space requirements and their workforce and their staff to undertake the influx of the number that will be associated with the high fire hazard severity zone. And again, that's just one small example of some of the ramifications to this. But it has been asked of us to do, or not asked, it has been told we are going to do it. So you'll be seeing those maps come out in near future. So develop a proposal to establish a prescribed fire training center. So this is just a proposal, but the intent here from the legislature was that they want those that are going to be conducting prescribed fire in the public sphere or in a third-party organization to have a higher degree or higher level of training when conducting these prescribed burns, so that there's a higher level of comfortability with those prescribed burns taking place across the state. The other big one is I spoke about when I did my introduction about an online burn permit system. So AB 642, CAL FIRE had already undertaken the feasibility of creating a wholesale online program for for all 3 of our permits, which are the 62 Alpha, which is burning 4x4 burn piles behind your residence for hazard fuel reduction clearance. But we have a presence for that online now, but not as robust as what we're going to be rolling out this year. We also included the LE5s, which are our interagency burn permits, working with our partner agencies, state parks, Fish and Wildlife, and others that conduct burning in the state responsibility area, and also ag burning. But then also our LE7 that relates to prescribed fires as far as broadcast burning. So all of those will be inclusive in this automated online system, and AB 642 makes it so that we shall, in the verbiage of the law, implement and develop and implement an online automated system for burn permits. So you'll be seeing that rolling out in the near future this year. The next thing is Senate Bill 63, and again, as I mentioned, related to fire hazard severity zones, and then I added a little bit here for community mitigation. So again, requires moderate and fire hazard severity zones to be mapped in the LRA, but it also creates, and which we talked about a little earlier, was this defensible space and home hardening assessment program. So I'm not going to rehash that. We talked about the implementation for that and what that's related to. So when we talk about defensible space, we really always need to be talking about home hardening. They are 2 different things, but they are synergistic. They need to be spoken about in the same breath at the same time, always accomplishing 2 different things, but really need to be done in tandem. So some other things here. This one is another big one. Expands Chapter 7A into the high fire hazard severity zone, and consider it in the moderate fire hazard severity zone. So if you're not familiar with what Chapter 7A of the building code is, it's increased standards for building construction material used to build a home. So instead of being able to have a wood shake roof on your home, the Chapter 7A of the building code doesn't allow that in the very high fire hazard severity zone. Now, with the signing of this law, you can no longer have that wood shake roof in a high fire hazard severity zone. And it's going to be considered that you not have it in the moderate as well, although not implemented at this point. That's just one example of some of the building construction features that aren't allowed or are required by Chapter 7A. This also requires a report to the legislature on outcomes of completed fire prevention projects. So we are going to be working on taking on that. Another big one that SB 63 did was allow us to advance up to 50% for equipment purchases in our fire prevention grant program. So oftentimes the fire safe councils and others they aren't stocked full of money to go buy the equipment that they need to do to implement the project that they're applying for. So this is a big deal for those that are applying for the grants that require equipment purchases. Now you're going to get a greater amount of money to be able to do that. So exciting news for that. SB 456. This one is Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force Action Plan, as I dubbed it. And the reason is it's very concise in what it's asking us to do. It's to develop an implementation strategy for the Wildfire and Forest Resiliency Task Force Action Plan, which is specifically Goal 2. If you look in the action plan, those are the ones that really govern and oversee the things that we are implementing as a division for the State Fire Marshal's Office. So it's our charge here, and very important charge, to not just take the action plan on its face and say, oh, look, these are the things we need to do, and here's our plan, but actually provide a detailed implementation strategy on how we are going to achieve all the goals related to us in that action plan. So, and set timelines and dates and measurable deliverables. And so we're really looking forward to that, because I think that really will set the stage and set the path for us moving forward and getting a lot of things done. And then it requires the implementation of specific actions as well. So there are a lot of actions identified in the action plan, but there were more specific ones it called out in the bill that it wants us to implement first. So that's a summary of all the bills. And so again, I'm going to share this presentation. So I just put some of the links that I showed along the presentation here, just as easier to get to. The other thing I wanted to do was just kind of show some of these graphs that we put out through our comms department, and just reiterate how important this concept of wildland fire threatening our communities is, and how it's become more prevalent in the last few years. So if you take a look here, only 2 of the top 20 have happened before 2000. All the rest have happened since the year 2000. And it really started in 2003 with the Cedar Fire, which is still on record as the fastest moving wildfire in recorded history. Previous to that, it was actually a fire in my local area called the Harlow Fire that was burning 5 acres every 2.5 seconds. So if you can imagine that, if you click your fingers every 2.5 seconds, 5 acres was burning. The Cedar Fire exceeded that by doubling, and went for 200,000 acres in a very short amount of time. So we're seeing these much more powerful, much more ferocious fires that are taking place. As you can see, they're getting bigger and they're getting more intense as we go through the year. So this thought of community preparedness and mitigation is at the forefront of our mind of how we're going to tackle this problem and make our communities more safe. Also, the most destructive fires, again, the same trend here, that only 2 of the most destructive fires have happened since before 2000. And you can see these numbers in the thousands constantly And of course, 2018, a very tragic year. All these years are tragic, but that one, of course, stands out to a lot of us. Although we are doing better, the number of arrests for arson suspects. So we've gone up pretty substantially over the last few years. So our prevention teams are doing a great job out there of making those arrests and trying to hold these people accountable. One other just interesting note here, people like to see, is the number of gallons and the number of retardant that we've used year over year. So as you would imagine, with the increase of the number of fires and the increase in the size of the fires, that we would also have a direct increase in the number of water in the form of gallons and retardant in the form of gallons that we're using. So just a neat little statistic here showing, our usage across the years. And then let me see if I can. Our incident response. Let me see, which one am I on? I can't see the top of it. Oh, this is our number of incidents across the state. And as you can see, those have just gone up and up and up over the years. So shortly before I started in CAL FIRE, we were seeing closer to 300,000 calls a year, and now we're seeing well over 500,000 calls. And people often ask why is there an increase? Well, there's many reasons. More people are moving out into the area with which we serve, 31 million acres across the state. There are just more people, and as we move into this area and we've become more of this all-risk agency. We respond to every single type of incident that you can imagine, whether it's a medical aid because somebody's having difficulty breathing, a motor vehicle accident, hazardous material spill, a swift water rescue, ocean rescues, which we do in our Schedule A contracts. But this is all inclusive of the number of incidents that CAL FIRE as a whole responds to, and it's among all the other things that we do related to resource management and fuels reduction and our aviation program and our operations program and the state fire marshal's office and the things that we oversee. This is just one component of it. So, but it's representative of all of what CAL FIRE is seeing is just an increase in responsibility as we move across the years. So, Daniel, that's all I had for the formal presentation. So I'm certainly welcome to entertain some questions.
All right, thank you very much, Chief, for that. Appreciate a lot of good information, a lot of new laws. Obviously, going to go backwards a little bit for some questions. I don't know if it's Stephanie or Bob Snyder. I'm assuming it's Bob. Actually, you have your hand up, Bob. I'm going to allow you to speak. So, Bob, you're added on our end. You can unmute if you'd like to speak and ask your question.
Thank you, Daniel. Raise your hand if you can't see me. The picture is not me. That's my wife. It's her Zoom account. I've got lots of questions, but I'm going to zoom in on one area that's new and going to affect our communities, and that's this inspection for selling your home if you're in one of the higher severity zones. I assume there's going to be some inspectors identified. I'd like to know where they're coming from, whether it's Auburn City firefighters or a new part of CAL FIRE. That's one question. And I assume I'm from the building industry, and if they don't pass, do they have a chance to do some work and then pass? Or is it a one-time fail, no pass? And this is going to cause a lot of angst in the real estate community, how they meet these requirements. Can you shed any light on how that would be handled in terms of a close date for an escrow and let's say a place doesn't quite pass? What leeway is there at that point?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks for the question. And I know that's a concern for a lot of folks. So first, I think you asked about the number of inspectors. So we have added additional staff through AB 3074. Through AB 38, we added 21 additional full-time permanent inspectors to meet the demand of this law. So we've added the additional staff, and so there are two things at play here. There's the state responsibility area, where CAL FIRE has jurisdictional responsibility to provide that service or that inspection. The complicating factor is if a local jurisdiction has enacted an ordinance that's more strict than what the state minimum standard is 4291, then that local ordinance becomes, based on the law, the certificate of compliance that's needed for that home sales transaction. So it would be up to the authority having jurisdiction, or the AHJ, to provide those inspectors to accomplish that. So for us, for CAL FIRE, we have not had a time yet where we have missed a deadline. You know, we've had a lot of talks with the California Association of Realtors, or CAR, and let their realtors know, if you even are thinking about selling a house, or your sellers come to you and said, hey, I'm thinking about selling it, get the inspection. The reason is the inspection is good for 6 months preceding the home sales transaction. So you have 6 months to do this before you sell your home, and it will still count. So there's really, you know, when we have short sales, 10-day sales, or any others, those are anomalies, and we do our best to, and we haven't missed a deadline yet, to make that, make sure that we get that inspection done on time. The second part of your question is, yes, everyone with defensible space always gets more than one chance. So we start our process. The fear there is, if you're not in compliance and you waited till the very last minute, you might not have enough time to get the compliance before the transaction date. So that's why we encourage people to, as soon as they think about selling their home, get the inspection. If there are things that you need to do, we will note that on the inspection as a first inspection. We will come back and conduct another inspection. Then now you're in compliance. Now you have your certificate of compliance, and you can proceed. Again, with the caveat that if they don't achieve compliance before the sale, the seller can transfer that liability over to the buyer, where they would have 1 year to achieve that compliance.
And how do you police that?
Good question, Bob. We don't. This is something that we have identified as a place where we need to tighten up the verbiage in the law, because we don't get notified. CAL FIRE doesn't get notified about every transaction that happens across our jurisdictional area. So we wouldn't know if the buyer has assumed that liability from the seller. So I don't want to go into too much more detail, but I think you can get what I'm saying. We don't know. So
okay, it's an area that needs to be cleaned up, because that would be
yes,
a loophole in your program if I just had to transfer it to the buyer and then it went away.
It is a loophole, and again, this was the legislation, and the way that it was drafted was the way that we implement it. So we don't have any say on how this language was, you know, drafted. So we have to implement it as it's written. And you have identified an area that we have also identified and will be working with to hopefully resolve.
I would like to see the 6 months expanded to 1 year, because I think most of the things we do to pass an inspection or to prepare our houses are last more than 6 months, I'm going to say. And then the second thing, that was just a comment. And then
Right.
The second thing is, I can see this as a new business enterprise of companies who are familiar with construction and home repairs, that sort of thing, can offer people who even aren't thinking about selling their house right now, but a program to upgrade their homes, and then that would subsequently prepare them for compliance.
Yes, and there are examples of that already. People have seen this, and there are upstarts that have used that model you mentioned to kind of help people with this. And that's great. And the whole point here is to get people to achieve compliance of defensible space. And if something like this helps, create some business around this and some entrepreneurs out there and they're creating more defensible space, that's fantastic. And just back to your comment about the 6-month proceeding, and I understand that there are certain things that you do that last a year. I think a majority of the things that related to defensible space last less than a year to achieve that compliance. And some of the things I'll mention are grass growing, leaves and needles, especially, and the accumulation of the fall months on rooftops and in gutters and around decks and the like. So to me, the 6-month is good. Just as a comment, a retort back to your comment, but certainly open for other suggestions.
Well, thank you very much for giving this presentation. I'm going to suggest that into the future, say 5-10 years from now, the leaves and that type of hazard, everybody's taking care of that on a monthly basis through efforts of our fire safe councils and local efforts, because to leave that till the time a house is sold is criminal.
Yeah, and there are a lot of places around the state that are very diligent and very active, that have a lot of oversight on their constituents or the people around them. But there are equally, if not more, areas that do not. And this is, anytime we implement these kind of programs, they're designed to be, of course, statewide and not always as applicable in certain areas as they are others. So I don't think it's the intent of anybody to leave a mess until they sell their home. I just think that times change as we go through different seasons of the year, and where we inspected something on July 1st, it may not be the same conditions as if we inspect it on October 1st. So that things change in those months. So I think that's the point.
Thank you, Daniel.
Bob, good questions. Did put into the chat feature the link to CAL FIRE's Defensible Space program, which has on the left-hand side the real estate inspection request. And again, just to differentiate for this group, if you live within the city of Auburn, obviously the city of Auburn Fire Department is the contact. Outside of the city, in most parts of this county in the state responsibility area, it'd be CAL FIRE through Placer County Fire, or because it's SRA. So again, that link is in the chat feature as well. Frank, the next question here that was briefly, I think we discussed, was related to the subdivision review. Cindy, and for the group, this was Cindy's question, excuse me, and asking where she can find the results from those reviews. I did put into the chat feature a link that has all of the different subdivisions that have been identified and reviewed. I'll note Placer County has not yet been reviewed, but Frank, for the question though that still needs to be answered is when is follow-up on the recommendations going to occur? What's the access to funding to implement these recommendations? So, let's get past the fact that, not all the inspections or evaluations, I should say, have been done. But once they've been done, once recommendations have been made, what work is going on related to funding this work?
Oh, thanks for that question. And this AB 2911 is something that just recently I was asked to start to oversee this portion of our division. And I'm not as familiar with the amount of money or the allocations that have been given for the local jurisdictions to support those efforts. But I will find an answer. I know the deputy chief who's in charge of implementing the program, and I will get that answer for funding and get it to Daniel, and he can disseminate it out to the group.
Yeah, so I appreciate that, Frank. I'll bring that back if you have it by next week for our Fire Safe Council meeting. Cindy, if you're there, to pass that along. One thing I would note, there was a recent bill that was introduced, but it's not law, but it was introduced that would waive a number of the CEQA requirements for some of the work that is suggested or recommended or noted in the evaluation. So it doesn't answer the funding question specifically, Cindy, but it at least streamlines the environmental reviews to be able to help those recommendations. If you look at some of the recommendations that are in there for most subdivisions, I think most of the recommendations revolve around ingress and egress, meaning if you only have one way in, the recommendation is simple, which is you need a second way in, but it's obviously a very complex way or a very potentially complex issue to actually resolve. So the recommendation is easy, but how do you fix it is not easy. And so funding, I think a valid question and piece, but at least what the legislature has brought forward is waiving CEQA requirements to make it easier. Frank, and the other thing too, I know it's going to be Cindy's question because she's pinged me before, and so maybe you could follow up on this as well, which is when is the Placer County and the Auburn area going to see its neighborhoods in its subdivisions that meet the criteria reviewed?
That's another thing. I have not seen the schedule as they've laid it out to give you the exact date when that will take place. But I know that they have been, the team has been working on establishing what their workload is and developing out a calendar by which that will occur. So again, that's something that I will get back to you through Daniel on and get that timeline to you so you can expect when to see them. Great,
thank you. I am not seeing any additional chats, questions, or comments. Again, if you have any last minute, there's Bob again. Bob, we have 6 minutes, but I will go ahead and open it up. You can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question. Bob, you should be able to speak if you unmute yourself.
Sorry. Thank you, Daniel. On the same subject that Cindy was talking about, the above 30 homes with only one egress method. Right now, if you lived in a neighborhood like that and somebody wanted to build a home next to you on a vacant lot, there is no way that goes through a review and said, too many homes in that area. Is that what you're expecting to have happen eventually? Is there'll be a cutoff point?
That's through AB 2911. That's not the intent of what is happening. So if you follow the legislation, there are all kinds of ideas out there about how to air quotes solve this problem by everything from no longer allowing any building of any kind in the very high fire hazard severity zone. That's one example. Another example is that kind of housing density problem that you or perceived problem that you identified is what is max capacity in that community to allow for ingress and egress safely for those that do already reside in that area. So there are those conversations happening and those bills coming across. Which one takes hold and which one gets traction? It's my crystal ball. I dropped it yesterday, so I can't really see into the future anymore. That was a really convenient feature of life I had. So I can't tell you exactly what's going to happen, but the intent of 2911 is really to help those jurisdictions, those local government agencies, and those communities identify some methods or some ways to improve safety of that community.
Okay, and this last question is for Daniel. Is the city of Auburn going to take on a study of subdivisions to see which is the most extreme and needs to be fixed?
Yeah, it's a great follow-up question. I don't have the answer. I think that warrants some discussion with our chief. I completely agree that there's some discussion points. I know at the last Fire Safe Council meeting, there were some discussions about how do we address roadway widths that maybe at the time were appropriate and met the code, but are not meeting the code and even the need to today's standards. So don't have the specific answer. Of course, I support that and would love that discussion. We'll have to talk with the chief about how do we do that and how do we ensure that gets into the plan. But I guess one piece too to help answer the question, as 2911 is written now for these subdivision reviews, it's really to, as the chief said, identify the deficiencies that are to today's standards. Maybe they weren't when the time the neighborhood was built, but to today's standards, give the community a list of what are those recommendations to build or to change change the structure of the development to meet today's standards. But the piece that this legislation doesn't require, it doesn't answer, is then what? What are the next steps? How do you fund them? And I think those are all important questions, but the legislature took it one step at a time, which was let's just understand the magnitude of the problem, and then let's talk about ways that we can start supporting communities and making those changes. And good questions, Bob. Appreciate that. We have 2 minutes left, and Judy has a quick question here. Are the inspections available to those not planning to sell their home? So defensible space inspections for those who are not planning to sell their home, but still want to know the recommendations for improving their fire safety.
Great question. As always, and it's always been this way, if you want a defensible space inspection conducted on your home, you can contact your local CAL FIRE headquarters and request an inspection. And I'll note too, on the fire.ca.gov/dspace webpage, we have a self-assessment survey. You can find the link there on the left as you scroll down about 2/3 of the way. And that really walks you through every component that we'll be looking for related to the defensible space inspection and the home hardening things that you can do to your home that align with the low cost retrofit list and other higher cost things like roofs and sidings. But I would encourage all of you to take the self-assessment survey, walking around your home on your mobile device, and conduct that inspection yourself. And then once you're satisfied you've met all the requirements based on the report that you get from that assessment, contact your local CAL FIRE headquarters and have a professional come out and validate what you've done.
Again, just to differentiate, if you live within the city of Auburn, the City of Auburn Fire Department has the exact same process and support to come out. So we are now at 1 o'clock. Chief Bigelow, thank you so much for your time. We will ensure that we take your presentation. We'll put it up on the Greater Auburn Fire Safe Council's Facebook page. Hopefully you are all following that. And then a few of those follow-up questions, I'll look forward to updates from you, which I will bring back to the Fire Safe Council meeting, which is next Friday. And again, thank you for joining us for the first year's kickoff of this Fire Forum webinar. And we will be back here the second Friday of the next month with another topic. So again, follow our Facebook for those updates. Hope you have a great day and stay fire safe, everyone.